Greetings to everyone who listens to this video message, and greetings to all with whom you, after viewing this message, would share with. Today, I would like to share with you some basic understanding of what priesthood involves, what priesthood is, and I would look at it mainly from the angle of vision that Jesus Christ provided. All of us are familiar, all of us are aware that Jesus Christ denounced the priestly class as a set of hypocrites. Now, what's important for us to realize here is that the extended and detailed denunciation of the priestly class that we find recorded in the 23rd chapter of Matthew's Gospel is a comprehensive, omnibus denunciation. That is to say, Jesus in that text is not saying that there are some rotten priests. That's not what he's saying at all. He is including everyone in the priestly category in the same bracket of denunciation. It's most important for us to realize, because whenever I point out to my fellow Christians that Jesus' righteous anger was kindled against the priestly class of his times, the stock response I get is, that's not about priesthood in general. It's about some stray rogue priest. That's not it at all. You read the 23rd chapter of Matthew's Gospel, you will realize that Jesus comprehensively denounces the priestly class. He doesn't mention a single exception. And this is something that Christians find too hard to stomach. And the reason for this is not very obscure. Christians have been brought up from their birth onwards to believe that priests are necessary mediators between them and God, and that but for this priestly middleman service, they would end up in the pits. And this is the greatest lie that's been foisted on the Christian community, and more of that in course of time. The question that we shall address today, the question that we shall try and pose and seek an answer for, is the question as to what Jesus meant by priestly hypocrisy. If you read the 23rd chapter of Matthew's Gospel, you will be astonished at the number of times Jesus used the word "you hypocrites" in referring to the priests. As I have said in one of an earlier videos, Jesus is someone who never repeats, and yet in this context, we find him repeatedly denouncing priests in the most vehement and unmistakable terms. Therefore, the question is very relevant. What was the reason for it? How are we to understand this? Unfortunately, Jesus has not given detailed background information, which he rarely does. In fact, Jesus in his teaching is beautiful because of his brevity, the economy of words. He's unlike the preachers of our times or public speakers of the times. He doesn't waste a single word. He manages with a bare, absolute, astonishing bare minimum. So obviously we don't have much background information, and background information, unfortunately, is available for those who care to seek and find. And I have to admit in humility that I've taken some pains to do that, and that will be reflected in what I say about Jesus' views on priesthood in general. So then, I'm sure all of us are interested in this question. What is this hypocrisy that Jesus talks about? Why is the priestly profession of all professions more vulnerable, in fact most vulnerable, to the infection of hypocrisy? At this time I recall the writings of a German philosopher called Arthur Schopenhauer, who, in a book titled Religion, a Dialogue, says that priesthood is born in hypocrisy and it thrives by hypocrisy. There are, of course, other authorities that can be cited, but there's no need to do that because I would like to go entirely by the authority of Jesus Christ. So then what is the substance of this priestly hypocrisy? I'm sure this is a subject of interest to all people, not only Christians but also non-Christians, because the priestly class is a phenomenon common to most religions, though at least a couple of religions I know started without this encumbrance, the encumbrance of priestly yoke. Now, the basic pattern, and what I'm going to say is subtle, and therefore I request all of you to participate in it with keen attention. The basic pattern of priestly operation is that the priests substitute the original with their own contrivance, their own invention. Now, this is something so very glaring, but for centuries this has been neglected, overlooked. This has escaped the notice of believers, notice of Christians, even Christian intellectuals. Let me take an example to illustrate this very crucial observation I have just made, namely that the priests substitute the original with a counterfeit version of it invented by them. Now take the case of human birth. Now a new life comes into being because a man and a woman love each other and they enter into the intimate procreative process. And the priest has obviously nothing to do with it. But as soon as a baby is born out of this mysterious creative process of man-woman relationship, the priest appears. And he insists that the first birth really has no value. The first birth is entirely in the medium of sin. According to the priest, the relationship between a man and a woman is nothing but distilled sinfulness. Therefore, we have to believe, if we go by priestly wisdom, that God erred seriously at the beginning of the spiritual history of mankind in the context of creation, when God created man and said it's not good for man to be alone, and that's the 18th verse of the 2nd chapter of the book of Genesis. And therefore creates Eve. It's God who creates this relationship and this special experience, this privileged experience of being participants in God's creative processes by which the human race is perpetuated. So according to the priest, that was all wrong. So the priest has to invest something in the birth of a baby for that birth to be authentic, and that's called baptism. So we are told the canard, absolute canard, it's an insult to human intelligence, it's an insult to the sanctity of creation, that unless and until the priest sprinkles his water on the baby, or if a baby dies before it is baptized at the hands of a priest, the soul of the baby will go to hell. It will not be admitted into heaven, into the presence of God. Can you imagine the horror? Can you imagine the utter depravity of anyone saying that a newborn babe who dies for whatever reasons will go to hell simply because the priest has not sprinkled some water on him or her? Can you imagine anything more obnoxious, anything more roguish than this? And yet, that is something that the Christian communities throughout the world believe very ardently. And this is a priestly lie. The priest must recreate the birth of every human being. So the life of a babe begins in right earnest, according to the priest, only after it's been subjected to baptism at the hands of a priest. That is what happens. So the first birth is no good. The second birth, on account of some water being sprinkled on the baby by a man in cloth, that alone is the true birth. It is that new birth that the church recognizes. Now take another example. The example of wedding. A young man and a woman enter into this mysterious, sacred relationship, presumably to be maintained lifelong in fidelity, in joyful fidelity. It's not enough that a man and a woman love one another. It is necessary that the priest puts a stamp of authority on that relationship. If the priest's stamp of authority is not imprinted on the love relationship between a man and a woman, it is not love at all. It is something satanic. Of course, when I say this, I'm aware of the fact that marriage has also legal signification, and therefore it is necessary that a certain framework is created and everything is done within that framework. I have no difficulty in accepting it. But I have serious difficulties in accepting the priestly presumption that without the stamp of his authority, which is supposed to be the authority of the church, the love relationship between a man and a woman, which is actually created by God, can have no value. So it is a duty of the priest to create value where it does not exist. Or it's a duty of the bishop a duty of a priest to substitute false value with true value. The man and a woman, in loving one another, according to the priest, create false value. That false value of love relationship must now be transformed or alchemized into a true value by the magic of priestly authority. Now finally, let us look at another example, the example of death. Death is something mysterious. Death is an integral aspect of life. In fact, no life is complete without death. It doesn't have to be argued. It's so very obvious. And death is a domain of mystery. And by simple logic, no human being, no priest, no bishop, no archbishop, no pope in the world has any authority over death. And yet, we are all made to believe that when a person dies, his death becomes something of a monstrosity. If the local priest is not called, or if a bishop is available, it's even better. And the extreme unction is not administered, or at least the priest says a word. It is the priest who sends the faithful Christian onward to the other world. The loved ones who have been taking care of him for long will not do. The priest has to come, because it's a priest that lends some meaning to the death of a human being. Now, what is death? What is birth? What is married life? The priest really has absolutely no idea, but he claims total hegemony over it. Now, you might think that I'm exaggerating the case. You might think that, it's all right. What's the problem? The problem is, first of all, there's a false pretense. The priest, as priest, has absolutely no relevance to these cardinal stages in the life of a human being on planet Earth. But more importantly, this priestly interference prevents people from seriously engaging with the meaning and scope of these very profound experiences. Once a baby is baptized, all minds are closed on the mystery of birth. And another very interesting thing is, if you have attended baptismal services, you will see that in the baptismal service, the actual parents are sidelined and godparents are brought to the fore, as though parents who can bring this new life into the world cannot be trusted with looking after the spiritual welfare of the babe. Some special persons, some godfathers, some godmothers must be appointed. It's all the priestly trick. And presumably those godparents will take care of the baby. I can tell you that not a single godparent ever takes even a moment's worth of interest in the baby after the baptism is over. And yet this lie is perpetuated. So what Jesus is saying is that priesthood, the entire practice of priestcraft, comprises a series of falsehoods. Priests do not handle the original stuff. They can only handle the counterfeit stuff which they devise themselves. No priest can cause the birth of a new baby in the life of a husband and wife in the legitimate way. No priest can actually cause the marriage between a man and a woman because of his authority. And no priest has any authority over the death of a human being. And yet, the kind of hegemony that the priests have established on all these is truly reprehensible. It's all a bundle of lies. Now, when I say this, I'm quite conscious of the fact that my fellow Christians are likely to feel offended for the reason that what they have been accustomed to from birth onwards, and therefore what they have come to believe is the normal and necessary practice, is now sought to be questioned by me. But then I have to submit to you in all humility that I have no option but to do this, because if I heed Jesus Christ, if I try to understand as best I can the teachings of Jesus Christ, in particular the reason why Jesus denounced the priestly class as a bunch of hypocrites, then I have to raise some fundamental issues and unveil what, as Jesus said, you seek and you shall find, what I have found through a few decades of seeking, ardent, passionate seeking, but seeking with an open mind. And therefore, what truths have been revealed to me, I reveal to you, I share with you. It's up to you to take it or leave it. Therefore, please understand that there is a serious problem with priesthood. And this has a reflection in another way. That is, if you look at those who enter the priestly order, who are they? In most cases, the most mediocre people in a religious community embrace the priestly career. When a person tries various avenues and suffers defeat and rebuff in all of that and realizes that there is no scope for him left, then he comes up with the absolute canard that he has a call from God and therefore he must become a priest. So priesthood becomes the last refuge of mediocrity, but the moment a man is ordained and he appears in a cassock, he thinks he's completely transformed, which is another lie. I've seen very ordinary, mediocre people behaving in a most surprising manner. Let me give you a specific instance. I taught a young man, one of the most stupid, most idiotic persons, mentally retarded, I thought, persons I ever taught in St. Stephen's College was a man called Sunil Kumar Singh. He did BA Pass. A BA Pass in all colleges in Delhi University is meant for those who are academically the least promising. And very often the BA Pass program is meant to accommodate sports types and people who are actually interested in anything other than academics. So this boy got admitted to BA Pass. I taught him for 3 years, and all the 3 years he never opened his mouth. And one day, lo and behold, I came to know that he had become a priest. And I happened to see him. He was looking down upon me. And as tragedy would have it, a few years later, because this man was absolutely corrupt, dishonest, completely devoid of self-respect, he bribed his way to become the Bishop of Delhi. And he became the chairman of the governing body of St. Stephen's College when I was its principal. I cannot tell you the airs he gave himself. So I have seen all this. I mean, I'm not talking in the air. I have seen umpteen cases. Now, all these pretenses, do you think that there is an element of truth in any of this? All right, let me leave a final question with you. How many priests and bishops have you seen who actually abide by the teachings of Jesus Christ? The priestly pretension is that they are representatives of Jesus Christ, right? They are the links between you and Jesus. That's their pretension, in which case they should have something to do with what Jesus stood for. Take any of the teachings of Jesus Christ, particularly the ethical teachings of Jesus Christ, and use that as a yardstick by which to measure or assess the priest and the priestly conduct, then you will see the truthfulness of what I'm saying. So, let's realize there is something seriously wrong with priesthood. This is the reason why Jesus came, and this is again something that Christians have very great difficulty in understanding, much less accepting, and that is, people even today don't realize that Jesus came to liberate human beings from their bondage to priestly authority. Jesus came to liberate people from under the yoke of priestly domination. And therefore, actually, as Peter realized, and he says so in his epistle, after the ministry of Jesus Christ, the ministry of fulfilling God's plan for humanity, there is no, or there should be no scope, there is no room, no margin for priesthood. So Peter talks about the priesthood of all believers. Now, if all are priests, then surely there are no special priests. Whereas today, the priests thrive by creating a special category for themselves, and in relation to which the lay people are inferior. If a layman, if a lay person tries to lead a Bible study, the priest will be offended. I got into serious trouble. I'm not a layman, I'm an ordained person. When I tried to organize a meeting, a kind of interactive session for the members of a particular congregation with Swami Agnivesh, who was staying with me at that time, the bishop damned me to hell because his authority was compromised. Whether the people would benefit from it is none of his concerns. Not a leaf should stir outside of his authority. Okay? Why? Because he alone knows. He told me to my face that I was endangering his sheep. He said, I know best what is good for my flock. Who are you to interfere? And he told me off. And ever since I have been in deference to his dictates, keeping a distance. So what I'm saying is, it's not a matter of a personal grievance. What I have found out through meticulous research, reflection, reading, is what I'm sharing with you. If you go by the wisdom of Jesus Christ, if you go by Jesus' vision for humanity, you certainly have to accept one thing, that Jesus left no room for priests to interfere in the life of human beings. He envisaged a way of life, a spiritual way of life in which there would be no interference, no intruders, no middlemen between believers and God. That's why he said, your faith has healed you. In other words, you don't have to go via the priestly class. Faith is something that connects you directly to God. But that faith has no value for the priest. The priest has value only for faith as it is redefined by the priestly class and institutionalized in the form of a denominational doctrine and dogma. Only that is faith. Again, only that which is completely contained within the narrow framework of priestly authority is faith. That is no faith if you go by Jesus' standard. Anyway, there are more things to be said in this connection. Already I have taken about 23 minutes. I'll do succeeding videos highlighting various other aspects that every person must necessarily know. And I hope that you'll continue to take interest in this. If you have any informed disagreement with what I'm saying, if you think that I'm misrepresenting facts, if you think that I'm misinterpreting the biblical text, that I'm misrepresenting the statement of Jesus Christ, please feel free to express yourself under the thumbnail, the opening thumbnail sketch, where there is space for comments, and I'll carefully go through everything and I'll respond, and maybe collecting together various responses, I could do several videos so that we actually develop this into an ongoing conversation. I would beg of you to participate in this process without denominational hang-ups, as well as inherited pietistic notions which are simply dictated by priests, over which we have not exercised our responsibility to think and assess and establish the truthfulness of. Therefore, we must now assume responsibility for our own spiritual well-being. It is far too precious to be abandoned into the hands of priests and bishops. At any rate, the entire priestly class today have proved it beyond any doubt. They are simply incompetent to do so. They're indifferent to this responsibility. In fact, they need our help. They need the help of the laity. That is sincerely the situation today. Every bishop, every priest needs the spiritual help and guidance of the laity. And therefore, the lay people today have to become spiritually mature to be able to assume responsibility for their spiritual well-being. And it is to that end that the series of video messages is dedicated. Thank you.